Hello and welcome to another episode of the Silk and Steel podcast. Today we have back on our show Einar, who has been a long-term resident of China. But the fact that Einar, that you are American, you know both sides. You know America very well. You know China very well, and we are at a very crucial juncture of the Sino-American relationship. And this is why I like to pick your brains a little bit on the current situation between China and United States, because you have you have your networks, you know how things work inside out. There's a lot of let's just get to the recent news. With U.S. kidnapping of President Maduro of Venezuela. Um, Now I see a lot of spin, in social media as well as mainstream media, and somehow was a great victory for the Trump administration, because now United States has control of all the world's largest oil reserve, and this is a great humiliation for China because Chinese envoy were in Venezuela to meet with Maduro 5 hours before the U.S. operation began, and now Trump is somehow going to cut off the oil flow to China. And I even see news headlines saying that, this is going to put Xi Jinping on notice because now China will not have the oil to go out to do a Taiwan operation. To me, this sounds very ridiculous, but nobody listened to me. So I would like to hear from you, Einar, your take on this situation.
Well, Carl, let me first thing. I always get a little hinky when people say that they're experts on two countries, let alone one. I have friends in China who have lived there their entire life. They're extremely intelligent, well-read, and they'll tell me they don't know China. So, and the same in the U.S. So knowing both countries is not really that possible. But I do look at some differences. So let's break this down a little bit. All right, first you have Donald Trump, thumping his chest, playing, Lord of the Jungle, Donald of the Jungle. He's successfully, in his mind, run down to Venezuela, seized it. He thinks that he's had a great victory. But from the Chinese point of view, there's some short-term concerns. China gets between, or has in the past, between 2 and 4% of its imported oil coming from Venezuela. They put about over $60 billion into Venezuela, and they still owed about $10 billion. A lot of that was for infrastructure and to keep their oil industry going. I personally know one of the lawyers who was working on that deal, and without violating any confidences, he said it was very interesting. The people were extremely interesting on it. So, from China's perspective, yes, there are short-term concerns about that, but it's not irrevocable. Maybe the price of heavy oil goes up a little bit, but there are other places that are buying for it. Remember, we're in the midst of a global slowdown. Oil prices were softening. There's room, there's capacity there, so there's not a global shortage. So, but long term, I think in the medium and long term, China has actually come out of this looking better, and not by anything it's done. Simply the U.S. By showing that it is a irresponsible power that believes that the law of the jungle rules the land, has shown the world that it is not only unreliable, but that it is willing on any pretext to take whatever it thinks it can get. And nowhere is more apparent in that than it's his constant threats about Greenland. Greenland is not a narco state. Reindeer are not terrorists, and 50 some odd thousand people there have been living in peace, and they haven't invaded anybody. So this is just purely a power play. He has switched. In theory, he's trying to tell the world, well, I don't need to be a global hegemon. I don't need to control the world. I just need to control my hemisphere. It's my right. The problem with that is I don't think anybody believes that if he was able to secure the Western hemisphere, that he wouldn't go over the other, go towards the other hemispheres. And that's very important, because if he, in fact, was trying to signal that, not that it's acceptable, but if he was trying to signal that, he would be withdrawing troops and bases, the 400 bases that surround, in Asia, that basically surround China. He would be pulling troops back from Europe and saying, look, I'm done with all that stuff. You guys figure it out. I'm just going to, take what I want here. Like I said, law of the jungle. So from China's perspective, long term, they've been validated. They've expressed concerns about the desire of the U.S. and Washington, in particular. I shouldn't say the U.S. people. U.S. people are not in sync with this. But the folks in Washington really believe that they have the right to contain other countries, whether it's Russia, Iran, China, Venezuela, anybody they don't like, anybody who doesn't fit their ideological core. Well, the ideological core, as I remember it, was free speech, self-determination, a ballot box. And what do we see happening here? The exact opposite. The hypocrisy does not bother Donald Trump. Happy to go forward with whatever, is necessary to get, quote, what he wants. You have to give me access. I mean, he sounds exactly like the minor real estate developer that he was. And I'd say minor in the sense that he was never one of the big New York real estate guys. They all laughed at him. They thought he was, a clown, somebody who was promoting himself endlessly, but didn't have the wherewithal to avoid 6 bankruptcies, and turned his father's big fortune into a medium-sized one, this type of thing. But there's something that is very troublesome to me, and that is that Trump is the master of distraction. And, generally he throws out what I call a dead cat, or, a bunch of white rabbits, or both simultaneously on a daily basis. So, this distracts the press, and they look at the dead cat and say, oh my goodness. And then they see the white rabbits and they follow them around the room, and then they repeat that the next day. There's really never a pause in the ongoing, news cycle, especially when it comes to Trump. But if you start looking at the number of issues that have come on, how quickly they follow on each other. Most of these issues, for instance, 500% tariffs on India, that would have been at least 2 or 3 day issue, right? Distraction. Venezuela would have been at least a couple of weeks just by itself. Greenland would have been another 3 or 4 days. I mean, by the fact that he's doing this simultaneously speaks to a certain amount of desperation. And I say that because, he's been successful in avoiding most of the issues regarding the Epstein files, which seems to be a huge concern. You have they said there's 300,000 or 400,000 pages of documents and boxes of, who knows what, recordings, etc. And that was one thing. Now they discover that there's more than 2 million that haven't been really processed. And yet they say, oh, this was, completely investigated and all this kind of nonsense. So he's clearly bothered by the Epstein case. He's been fighting every tooth and nail to keep it out. You heard that recording where he starts swearing that he's not going to release them. Says some choice things about Marjorie Taylor Greene. And so, you have the thing. And then there's other reasons to distract. His base is attacking each other. It's very easy to put together a coalition of people who feel that there's something wrong. But it's very hard to control that coalition once you get into the seat of power, and you have to start administrating, because they have very, very, very different ideas. You have white supremacists, you have evangelicals, you have people who just, simplistically believe that, he could single-handedly bring down prices and make the world better again. And, his initial speech, A Golden Age, his base lapped it up. They've in essence become a cult. When you talk to them, you say, how about this? How about that? the Epstein files, no, it's fake news. Even things that he's actually said and done, they'll say, no, he never said or did that. And even if you show them, they'll just say, no, that's not true. I don't believe it. And that's it. They're not interested in the facts. They just accept him emotionally because he reflects in their minds their angst and their troubles, in their own lives. They see their life degrading. I don't blame them for looking for somebody who can save them, some sort of strongman. So often in these cases, when people are desperate, people who show up to help aren't there to help. They're there to take more. And, given that Donald Trump has more than doubled his wealth and the net wealth of his children in this first year, at some point that's going to come home to roost. Then you have, apart from his base, you have the over 60% of Americans who are living paycheck to paycheck. And guess what? They're about to get a real, especially people at the lower end of that, are about to get a just horrible shock when their health insurance premiums go up. And Donald Trump doesn't want to talk about that. And so I think he's, ramping up the speed, all right, of the distractions that he's putting out there to try to keep the narrative going. The question is, every time you do that, then the next thing you say has to be even more outrageous. And, seizing a Russian flag tanker, not off Venezuela, right, but near England in the Channel Coast, that is serious. We don't know how far he's going to go. Now, China and Russia are not going to fight America in conventional weapons. In South America, they couldn't, for the same reason the U.S. would have a very difficult time fighting China. In the event that Taiwan decides that they want to declare independence, the supply lines are too large. I mean, you can see large fleets coming for days, and they would be very vulnerable to attack and things like this. For the same reasons, they're not. But there is the economic side of this. Europe has already attacked Russia. They've seized, Russian assets and things like that. And they said, well, we're just basically going to keep them. Well, they tried. You had one member said, no, we can't do that. It's one bridge too far. But they certainly have said, oh, we're going to take the interest from these monies that we've seized or we're embargoing, and we're going to help Ukraine with that. That's a violation of international commerce. I mean, you cannot be secure if governments are willy-nilly deciding what they want to decide based on not what you did, but what your government did. This idea that all Russians are part of the government is kind of silly. It's like all Americans are part of the government. No, I don't think so. It's become a complex situation, but when you start looking at his distractions and how they're escalating, there's a real danger that we will accidentally get into some sort of kinetic conflict. And I say that because this reminds me of World War I. No one wants a war, but each side was trying to draw the line and say, don't cross this line. And, do you do this? I'll do that. Then it was based on all of these alliances and things like this. But today it's based on unilateral action by the U.S. as it struggles to maintain its hegemony, and extremely dangerous. It's been very poorly received in South America, or Latin America. Although, there have been a number of countries who supported it. I think that is not representative of the people. There's way too much memory going on in South America about assassinations. There have been between 56 and 66 regime change operations acknowledged and recorded since World War II in Latin America. And this has touched almost every single country. And it is something where they don't forget. They remember this. You go to Chile, you say Allende, things like that. Don't go to Chile and tell them how wonderful you think Henry Kissinger was. You know, they have a difference of opinion there. You know, they have relatives that died because of actions of the U.S. that were pushed forward by a nascent Henry Kissinger, who believed great power was, you know, you kept your power by doing asymmetrical things to anybody who challenged you. So if somebody gave you a dirty look, you'd go in and kill them. And if they, you know, actually did something, you'd kill their village. This was the kind of things. I mean, Henry, you know, in China, they admire him, but I always point out that he was responsible for millions of deaths in Indonesia, Africa, South America, Southeast Asia. I mean, he was a butcher. He didn't do the work himself, but he was certainly the mastermind behind all these ideas and strategies and things like that. And yet his legacy continues. Now he's, you know, a much vaunted, you know, passed away strategist who people always like to quote. But the dirty reality was that, you know, he was right up there in terms of the people who was responsible for more deaths probably in history than many others. So this is the reality that we're looking at. You have the short term where China has some minor concerns. It could lead to more if Donald Trump starts to, you know, implement this policy of going through to any Latin American country that is doing trade with China and trying to sabotage that. You'll note that today Donald Trump said that no foreign advisors from China, Russia, Iran, anywhere can be allowed in Venezuela. He's trying to run the country by remote. It's difficult to see how that is going to work. He can certainly extort them, continue to threaten them, get them to give him free oil. But at some point, he's going to reach a tipping point where, you know, unless there is investment, all right, and it's to the tune of about $100 billion would be necessary to bring back the Venezuelan oil industry. And I don't know that the big oil companies are that interested. You know, people think, whoa, of course, look, you know, huge, plentiful supply. Well, you know, it used to be that Venezuela, you know, could be counted on as a source for oil. Then it wasn't. So the major oil companies moved into the oil sands of Canada. They invested $500 billion. All right. They bought up leases. Oil sands is a dirty, nasty business, and it requires very specialized equipment. It's not like you move it somewhere else. It's a very particular type of solution. And even within different oil fields, you have slightly different conditions and you have to modify them. So it's not like they can take their equipment and run down to Venezuela and start processing oil. So they would have to, in essence, abandon their leases, and then go down to Venezuela, which is going to be a political risk. We don't know what happens after Donald Trump leaves. We certainly don't know what happens even in the midterms. And you could have a situation where internal strife, you could get civil unrest there, which would make it difficult to get the oil out. You could have a new regime come in a few years and say, we're going to renationalize this. You know, we were illegally invaded by another country, and we do not accept this. Remember, the people are still going to vote. And if they're poor, if the U.S. is taking the revenue source, but not repairing the infrastructure, that means there's less revenue to a country that is already struggling. And the United States has nothing. Have you noticed any plan whatsoever to do anything within Venezuela? You've heard this, for the benefit of both countries. Well, come on. He's not interested in Venezuela. He doesn't have a plan to help them. He doesn't have a plan after 18 years of criticizing American healthcare. He doesn't have a plan now. How do we expect him to have a plan for a country he doesn't even know anything about? He doesn't care about. I mean, they were unable to articulate anything that happened the day after. What happens the day after you seize these people? You know, how are you going to do this country? And it's complete mess. You can see that. that goes back to my first point, or my second point, that he is doing a lot of things just to divert attention from other problems, especially his domestic ones. So, and then let me just explain one thing and I'll stop talking. Why does America, which produces more oil than it needs, why is it interested in this oil from Venezuela? Does everyone, think about that? We export more than we import. The reason is that we export, the majority of our oil is what they call sweet crude. It's light. It doesn't need a lot of processing, and it has a high value. You can turn it into gasoline and jet fuel and all of these wonderful things. Now, heavy crude, all right, so they call it sour. It has a lot of sulfur in it. That sulfur has to be taken out, and then it has to be processed in a completely different way. Now, in the United States, 60% of our processing is for heavy oil. So what happens is you have this problem where the U.S. is geared for heavy oil, but it doesn't really have a great supply. Canada is more expensive, yes, but it's also more stable. Venezuela sounds great, but in essence, you're asking the major oil companies to take a haircut on their own investments and go into an area that is very, very politically risky. So this situation of the imbalance, and the reason we're doing this so that we can, supply heavy oil to these refineries, which, Trump came out and said, oh, these guys need the oil because they have a shortage of heavy crude. Well, that sounds great, but it's not a reliable solution. It hasn't been thought through like many of Trump's ideas. He doesn't seem to grasp the reality of the industry, and whether he's helping or actually hurting it. The problem is that somebody will start going in and developing, Venezuela's oil at some point, and when that happens, yes, you're going to have a real problem with, the major U.S. oil companies who've invested in tar sands in Canada because they're going to be at a price disadvantage. This idea that somehow by lowering the price, you're going to help everything, that all of a sudden, America will be doing well. Well, if you lower the price of oil, America is an exporter of oil. So you're going to lose at the same time as you're, quote, winning, but you're losing more because the amount you're losing on your sales, which are greater than your imports, it's not a victory at all. All right, there's offsets, and this is the complexity that Donald Trump and his administration don't seem to grasp. They're uniquely unqualified. They lack the experience, temperament, you name it. They don't have it. It's just simply the cast of The Apprentice to Washington edition, all expendable people who, they look great. They're completely idiot. I mean, come on. I mean, you have a woman who was used to shuffle papers for insurance companies out there trying to prosecute a criminal case, a sophisticated criminal case. She doesn't even know where to stand or who to talk to or what the standards are. It's criminal incompetence to have people like that. But these are the people he surrounds himself with. Why? Because they are expendable. He can call them in the office and say, "You're fired." And his base will go nuts. Oh, he's really showing them this is just like The Apprentice. Okay. But reality isn't a show, and Donald Trump is falling way short of the mark. The question is, when does it catch up with him? Or when does he do something so risky that we start to get retaliation and then escalation?
I'm in complete agreement with you about Trump is doing this as a distraction. I mean, he's great for television. Trump knows how to be the reality TV show host that he really is. But I do have a question about why then he's going to. I mean, there's all these other distractions that he could focus on. As you said, just focus on Venezuela or focus on squeezing tariff out of India. why is he then going after Greenland? I mean, that doesn't make sense. If you want to be the hegemon, you want to get more people on your side. Build up your alliance to shore up your position. But Trump looks like he's single-minded to destroy NATO, to destroy the one institution that lock in the Europeans as the American vassals. And he is going after a NATO country, Denmark, the owner of Greenland. And when U.S. already, all this reason they throw out for why U.S. need to acquire Greenland, because Greenland sit on a very strategic shipping lane, because it sits on the Iceland, UK, Greenland gap. You can monitor the Arctic when the ice melt. We can deter the Russians and the Chinese shipping, in the Arctic from the bases in Greenland. But all that excuse is bogus, because currently U.S. already have access to Greenland per agreement with Denmark, per agreement with NATO. They can do all that right now. So why is it that he was dead set on acquiring Greenland while antagonizing a NATO ally and potentially turning Europe against him? I mean, like the Europeans leaders already, they all despise him, but they still have to scrape and bow because American power. But now they're really, I mean, the Greenland might just be a bridge too far, taking away a sovereign territory of a NATO country. What do you think is the reason he's doing that?
Well, Carl, first off, he doesn't care about Europe. He sees them as weaklings. He said so on many occasions. So the idea that he takes them seriously is there. I mean, you can see a very clear pattern. Any country that stands up to him, all right? Oh, he's like, oh, can't we be friends? We can work this out. China, Russia, the mayor of New York. People always ask me, why is he so nice to a guy who called him a fascist? I said, it's very simple. The way Donald Trump thinks, he's vindictive. If you haven't noticed. And, if he was mayor of New York and he didn't like the president, and the president had a whole bunch of real estate inside New York, Donald Trump is very well aware of what he would do, which would be to send an army of inspectors on a daily basis to every single one of those properties to find some excuse to shut them down, to fine them, etc. It's the only reason that Donald Trump did it, self-interest. And that's the only reason he does anything else. In terms of Greenland, he really sees himself carved in the rocks of Rushmore. He even has a couple of mock-ups of him on there. So he's looking for this big thing. Okay, so I grab South America and I grab Greenland. I control the Western Hemisphere, and I will be in the history books as the greatest president, or more important to him, a better president than Obama. I mean, there was a real turning point when Obama made fun of him at the Gridiron Dinner, the annual dinner where they get together and they make jokes about each other. Donald Trump was looking, oh my gosh, he was so embarrassed at that. And it was widely reported that was the moment he said, I'm going to be president. I don't care what it takes. I'll do whatever it is. I'm going to make this bastard pay. And that's quite clearly what he's done since that point. So yeah, from his point of view, he wants to make himself, an FDR or whatever. And these are the ways to get it. He doesn't care about Europe. As I said, they're weaklings. He's going to grab what he can. And, with Venezuela, he's feeling very, he's on a high. I did it. No one thought I would do this. I'm showing that I'm the madman of diplomacy. No one can guess what I'm going to do next. And maybe I can extend that. I mean, in his biography, he has said, I don't think about yesterday. I don't think about tomorrow. What I think about is how to maximize today. So that's exactly how he goes about running the presidency. It's a day-by-day thing. As I said, throw out dead cats and white rabbits to keep the press out there, and then, cause chaos and commotion and see see what opportunities shake out. This is what he does. All right. He threatens, cajoles, does whatever. And then he watches to see how you're reacting. If he senses any weakness, he presses. If he senses any strength and ability to push back, he then looks for something else. It's just like with China. I mean, he thought his tariffs were going to reduce China to a puddle of jelly. Well, instead, they said, look, the world's interconnected, and you're not in a position to do all this kind of isolationist stuff you want to do. And then they had a meeting in Busan, and Trump realized, okay, this isn't going the way I expected. China has things like rare earths, strategic metals, chemicals, so many things, intermediate goods that we have to have. So he kind of says, okay, we're friends. We can work this out. Right? Meanwhile, he goes back home. Well, he doesn't even, before he goes back home, before he even goes to the meeting in Busan, he gives a green light to the Japanese ambassador to violate the ambiguity. The ambiguity was always about what the U.S. would do in terms of Taiwan, because although they agreed to there's only one China, and they signed international treaties to that, domestically, they pass a law called the Taiwan Relations Act, which just says, well, yeah, we agreed to that, but this is a domestic law, and this governs what we can do, and China, don't pay any attention to this, but we're going to keep complete supplying them so they can repair their military structure. That was the understanding. Now it's become quite a different game. So he encourages her to violate the ambiguity. Of course, it sets off a storm. It's now costing Japan a lot. China's announced that they're not going to allow dual use or military use of strategic metals and also rare earths, which puts Japan in a very difficult position. If they extend that to the automobile industry, basically it stops. So China has a lot of controls on it. China is a huge market for Japan. They have a lot of facilities here. To lose that for a country that depends so heavily on exports would be devastating. So China has its own pressures. So then he goes back to the U.S. and what's the game plan? Okay, we can't attack China directly. So what we're going to do is to attack them indirectly. We're going to go to every country and say, you have to stop trading with China. And that's exactly what they're doing today. And we're going to make it stick by going down and grabbing a country like Venezuela, which has close relationships with China, where China has invested, to send them a message that you can't come to our backyard. And if you do, it's going to cost you. So, but it's all indirect. All right, he hasn't coming. So expect a direct response, though, from Beijing, which obviously is not going to allow strategic metals and rare earths to be used in the weapons that the United States wants to build, not only to sell to other countries that are antagonistic towards China, but also allowing the U.S. to supply their stockpile of these weapons. And without these, zero. They cannot produce. All right, they can try to go through and salvage whatever they can, use what things, but it's going to run out. I mean, things like heavy magnets that are used in very delicate operations like gyroscopes and things like that, rare earth magnets. China has 98% of the market in terms of production, not in terms of the minerals. The minerals are all over the place. That is not the issue. The issue is that China has the production, and it would take the U.S. at least 5 years and a lot of money to try to replicate what China is doing now. Meanwhile, China will continue to go forward. It would take 10 to 15 years for the U.S. to try to come up with domestic solutions for their automobiles and things like that. Well, whether it's 5 years or 15, the fact is there would be no production during that time, or very, very limited production. And this would be a real threat to the U.S. arms industry. How do you sell things you can't make? I always laughed at when Donald Trump says, "We're not going to sell you the avionics that you need for your airplanes." Well, let's think about this. I'm not going to sell you the stuff we can't make. Okay. I think that's fairly obvious. But I don't think it's once again, he makes an absurd statement like this, not really working it through. And that is the real danger, that he takes a huge risk, hasn't thought it through. There's some sort of retaliation and then escalation, and then we don't know where that goes. But it's not a good place.
You mentioned something interesting. You're saying that the Japanese Prime Minister's Sanai Takaichi's provocative statement on Taiwan, which is that that Japan would send its military to Taiwan in case of a conflict, you're saying that is because she received the U.S. prodding to do so, maybe not out of her own volition. So you think U.S. is behind that, behind the escalation of tensions between China and Japan?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you look at the timing of his visit to there. He knew he was going to Busan and that it was not going to go well. He had made stops. Vietnam. Vietnam had come to the U.S., but he had made stops in Malaysia. No, Vietnam and Malaysia he made stops in. It was Australia that you talked to before. These are the main areas where they do have some very small amount of processing of rare earths. And he was, trying to collect these little bits and pieces so he could show up in Busan and say, hey, listen, if you don't give us what we want, we'll start making them ourselves. China said, okay, it'll take you what, 5, 15 years? Okay, good luck. Good luck with that. So he knew he was going into a bad situation. So, he was looking for leverage. Donald Trump is always looking for leverage. And he'll tell you that, I got to get leverage on this guy. I have to get better cards. All right. He sees it all as a game. So, the Japanese are very careful. All right. They're not going to violate an ambiguity clause. Now, she wants to, quote, normalize Japan. And the key to normalizing Japan is getting out, having their own nuclear umbrella, in essence. And she wants to move in that direction. But I guarantee you, the moment she gets her own nuclear devices, the first thing they'll do is ask the U.S. to leave. They do not like being an occupied nation. Japan is extremely xenophobic. A lot of her popularity right now is because she's closing the door on tourism, and a lot of the Japanese people are reacting very positively. That's not the ones who run the businesses, but the people at large saying, we don't like gaijin. We don't like foreigners here. They're impure. They're dirty. They're not Japanese. So they're not somebody we can deal with. So yeah, she wanted to say something like this, but the idea that this question wasn't planted. I mean, I used to run, I was in politics myself. When I wanted something like that, I would just tell, things, this is a good question. You should think about asking that. Well, gee whiz, they ask it and then you respond. So this was calibrated. She wanted to stand up as kind of an iron britches lady like Margaret Thatcher, who she admires. And, she wanted to say to the world, look, you can't toy with Japan. We have our own agency. And it dovetails with her desire to make Japan into a, quote, normalized entity. But it brings back very bad memories for Asia as a whole. Remember, this is 80th anniversary of the end of the anti-Japanese imperialist war. I mean, fascism supposedly was defeated back then, and the hope was it wouldn't come back. And now you're starting to see it clearly coming forward in Japan, also in the United States. I mean, the only way you can describe what Donald Trump is doing is fascism. I mean, this is exactly what Germany was doing. They're saying, for our protection, we need to take over this area. For their protection, we need to take over this area. That was what it was all about. And what happened? Europe appeased. It led to war. That's where history doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme.
I think I would dispute about the fascist description, because I know for a fact the train do not run on time in United States. So this is a fact.
You completely destroy my entire argument. Well, they don't run in Germany on time anymore either, apparently. But yeah, I guess I'll have to rethink that whole thing. In fact, our trains don't run very fast, never mind on time.
Yeah.
Anyways, go ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, it's just, I mean, I've kind of exhausted that. I mean, we know where the U.S. is and its strategy. Wants to take over all these areas, show it's strong. Trump thinks that this is the key to wooing the electorate back. But the problem is that if you can't eat, you don't really care about Venezuela or Greenland. I mean, U.S. people, you ask them where Greenland is. Point to a map without things. They'll be pointing to Central Europe or something like this, or Iceland or whatever. They have no clue about geography, so it would be very, very, very difficult for them to get excited about 50,000 people in a massive ice sheet. They don't, what's shipping to them if they can't pay their bills? And this is really the ticking time clock that Trump is running against. People think about this in international terms, but in America, as we both know, all politics is local, and he has a reckoning coming up with this mid-year election. And the problem is, if he follows true to form, he's either before or after the election declare it invalid and try to say, no, we're going to keep the same slate of people. The problem is about, droves of Republicans are in fact resigning. So how do you replace them? Maybe he just says, as long as there's more Republicans than Democrats, we'll freeze it. I'm sure right now they are trying to figure out if these guys do resign, how do we keep the House? I'm sure his, Stephen Miller, who is, wow, I mean, he's something else. Did you see his statement? He says, we can do anything because we're America. I mean, this sounded something like out of, it was the movie How I Came to Love the Bomb, Dr. Strangelove. I mean, he's that guy. He's the one sitting there going, I keep my essences to myself.
His wife is the one who tweeted out with a map of Greenland, painting the American color, and says, "You are next. Greenland is next.
Soon, coming soon." Yes, I mean, you really have a bunch of characters in there, but as I said, I mean, what happens if Trump becomes somewhat enfeebled? There are questions about his judgment now. Obviously, the filter. This minimal amount of filtering he had before is completely gone. He just says whatever comes to mind. But if he comes incapacitated and you have the same crew there, people should be thinking very carefully what that would mean. In essence, they could be independent actors. Rubio would get his long wish to go into Cuba and take over the government. And then declare that all the old families who lost their lands so many years ago are now back in control, and they should get interest, and basically create a serfdom society. He might be a hero to the few people in Florida left who remember the Cuban Revolution, but it certainly isn't going to solve anything. And then you have Miller pushing his right-wing, white is right agenda. I mean, he would be going off in a different direction, and there would be no controls of it. Right now, they have to bow and scrape before Donald Trump. They have to watch, make sure they don't get too much limelight, and that they always put him front and center. And that he's going to react to whatever they say. He's malleable to a point, but he's always looking at the polls. He's looking at the news, and he's with an eye towards his own glorification, making himself into the great man that he isn't but wants to be.
Well, I mean, I think we all agree the current path that Trump has set U.S. on is not ultimately sustainable. But Trump is still going to be in the office for another 3 years. How do you see this all going to end? I mean, this is asking you. I'm asking you to look into your crystal ball for a little bit, but
Well,
like how he's doing a heck of a job right now to distract people from Epstein file, even though there's still people on social media asking him to show us the files. So he can bring pivot from one crisis to the next, but do you think he's ever going to run out of this kind of crisis that he can artificially create to keep his you know to to keep himself above the questioning and go ahead.
yeah, that's what I was referring to earlier. I mean, you have to do more and more outrageous things, and when you do those, there's a risk. As I said, that you cross lines. For instance, seizing a Russian oil tanker. Well, Russia's going to respond. My guess is that they'll say, "You took one of ours, we're going to take one of yours, and if you want yours back, you give us ours back." That's Putin is not a pushover, and he's certainly not going to be bowed or kowtow to Donald Trump, who he sees as a fool, a kind of foppish clown that he's been able to push around because he's the stronger man. He's the man that Donald Trump aspires to, ironically. So, yeah, there's going to be retaliation. And then the question is, does it escalate? Or does Trump do what he's famous for, a taco? Right now, he's riding high on his success in Venezuela. The question is, do his advisors say, no, you can push these guys further. Don't worry about it. We got you covered. They're afraid of us. I don't think Putin is afraid of the United States. He's wary of them, but he's not afraid of them. He's not afraid to act. Otherwise, he wouldn't have gone into Ukraine. And quite frankly, we baited him into it in 2014 by sponsoring a putsch that took out a guy, somebody who was favorable to him, and put in somebody who was favorable to us. That's against the rule. If Russia did that, remember the Cuban Missile Crisis? We said, okay, we don't like these guys, and they're with Russia, so we're going to threaten nuclear war. Yes, putting missiles there, real problematic, but we had put missiles in Turkey. And the Russians regarded the missiles in Turkey the way we regarded the missiles in Cuba. So there was, people don't talk about it, but the resolution of that is that we took out the missiles in Turkey, and they agreed not to try to put missiles in Cuba. So, this would be international diplomacy. But the question is Donald Trump capable of that? He seems to be, jumping around, and because he has this pressure to distract the American public, you don't know exactly what he's going to do. But let's look into the crystal ball. We have different options here. One, Trump makes it to his 3 years. And actually, that's the best scenario. Because if Donald Trump goes for any reason, he's incapacitated, he's removed under Article 25, whatever, you have Darth Vance. And I call him Darth Vance because he believes in the dark enlightenment. I mean, the power of the dark force, literally. I mean, this is the religion that he and his sponsor, the guy who runs, what was it? Not Paradigm. What's the name of that company?
Palantir, Peter
Palantir,
Thiel.
yes. Peter Thiel, who's running around the United States telling people the devil is here. Well, when I look at Peter Thiel, and I think what the devil would look like, I think that's it. So maybe he's just advertising his own presence or something like that. But he and a bunch of these tech gurus, and incredibly rich, they have over trillions of dollars and combined net worth. And they have control over very sensitive areas, especially in terms of information and technology. Our friend Elon Musk is a fellow traveler with them. He believes that the world should be run by technocrats. that they do not believe in democracy. They rail against it, right? They actually, in their beliefs, they say democracy doesn't work. It's time to end it and to have, a lord of the techno lords to guide the world and put chips in our brains and make us better. It's a dystopian fantasy reality, and it's not that different, unfortunately, from the late 1800s when America went through this huge boom. The oil barons, the steel barons, the railway barons, and they thought exactly the same thing. They thought, oh, we're so successful, we're so incredible, we should be running the world. But invariably, what happens with these characters is that they all agree that they should running the world, except they don't agree on which one of them should be first among equals. And they ended up, trying to battle each other, literally trying to bankrupt each other, petty squabbling that kept them at bay until, there was a real change with the New Deal and things like this. So it's not repeating, but it certainly is rhyming with history. These people have an inflated sense of their own abilities. They don't realize that it was just luck. That there are more capable people than them, but the times weren't right. These people believe that they're divine or divinely inspired, or they're gods on earth or whatever. So he's a real danger. So you actually want Trump to stay in for 3 years. The problem with Trump is that every day of Trump is 7 days for the rest of us. We literally live in dog years, and it's it's really troubling to think that the next 3 years will be like 21 years in terms of everyday mass distraction, tacos, you name it, everything is coming at you. It's if you want to live forever, it's just every moment with Trump is an eternity. So just be thankful you're living in during this period. Yeah, I just thinks. Now, what other things? Well, obviously, there could be escalation, some sort of war. I don't think that. I'm hoping that it doesn't go nuclear, but you just don't know what people are telling him. The military-industrial complex always believes that they have the solution, and it's in Dr. Strangelove, as I said, as long as there's one American and no Russians, we won. This type of attitude is still there. I mean, it's scary. It's supposed to be, a satire, but these people actually believe it. So you can have escalation there. But you also, what I think is going to happen is within the United States, there's going to be a revulsion towards Donald Trump because his base is fractured. He's not giving them what they want. He's doing the exact opposite of what he advertised he would do. Now, there's still amongst his base the cult-like group who will excuse anything he does. If they showed him in a sexual video with a 14-year-old, they'd say it was fake, that it was created by the Democrats and it's a witch hunt and all this kind of stuff. But there are enough people in there, and we're already seeing that. The other day, you had the rioters, the 1,600 people who were pardoned for their criminal activity on January 6th. Well, some of them showed up in Washington and are demanding hundreds of millions of dollars in compensation for their hooliganism because they were pardoned. Therefore, they were right. If they're right, they need to be compensated for all the bad things that happened to them. Now, about 2% of these wonderful people have already been involved in crimes since then, everything from pedophilia to, fraud, attempted murder, just wonderful things, the kind of things you would expect from a bunch of hooligans who are attracted to an opportunity to express their rage and frustration at society because it didn't give them what they wanted. So this is a real danger in the U.S. You're going to get further polarization. The problem is the Democrats have nothing to offer at this point. They're actually infighting themselves. They don't like, the mayor of New York because he doesn't tick off the boxes that they want. I mean, you start looking at American politics. What has it become? It's party above individual. And surprise, surprise, you don't get leaders when you have a situation where you say, whether you agree or not, if you don't tick this box, we're not going to support you. If you don't say, oh, I support Israel, okay, you can't be part of our group. Right? If you don't say, you're for this or against that, you can't be part of our group. We'll take away all of our sophisticated machinery. And Iran elections have become much more money-driven and technologically driven. And you need people to do door knocks, and you need the analysis to determine how you can manipulate people into voting for you. What are the major issues? How do you craft answers? All of these things, very, very sophisticated. So if you don't have access to that or the money to buy it, you're at a disadvantage. And that's why we don't have third parties and things like that. So the Democrats are offering very, very little at this point. Maybe somebody comes forward. It would be wonderful if they did, but I'm not counting on it. Because of the structure of the party is not aimed at creating leaders. It's aimed at creating people who go along with the special interests that the party is supporting. And, you've seen that clearly. I mean, the Democrats used to be the blue collar party. And now you have more blue collar workers going directly for Trump because they feel alienated and left aside by what they see as a bunch of woke liberals who don't really care about their issues. So but it does come to the head for the rest of the world. Independents do not like what Trump is doing. They don't see it as valuable. It doesn't answer their issues, which are our bread and butter issues. And of course, Democrats are going to knee jerk anything anti-Trump is good. So there's going to be a change. The question is how he handles it and whether that results in violence or there's some recourse to the Supreme Court, which puts aside its desire to keep Trump in power and says, look, there's limits even to what we will allow you to do. If that happens, then the question is, does Donald Trump comply? He didn't comply with the orderly process. The last time he lost, he tried to overturn it. He organized a riot to try to pressure Mike Pence into not certifying something when he says, look, I'm just a figurehead. I don't make the decision. I can't even have a reason. I just get the paper and I read it and that's it. I'm not a judge, jury, and executioner here. And Pence recently gave he alluded to his message before, just recently on the anniversary of that, talking about how important it was for him to fulfill his constitutional duty. So you have a lot of turmoil, a lot of chaos. The river is not flowing in one direction. No one knows where it's going. It seems to be a flood in other areas, and other areas have no water on them, and no one knows exactly where the currents are going. And this indecision is affecting business. Businesses work on the notion that predictability. I'm going to invest money, and then there's a good reason to believe that money will return to me, and plus profits. But if I don't know what the situation is, there's no way in earth, all right, that I'm going to start investing money unless, I say, well, I can do something in this 3 years while Donald Trump is president and make all my money back and make a profit, right? Yeah, no, then I'll do it. But if it's going to go beyond that, we know that when change comes, it's probably going to be fairly dramatic. Will it be good change? I don't know. That's a tall order. We thought that Biden would change things. In actuality, he just carried on many of Trump's positions, and it was just kind of Trump light. I'm a nicer Trump. I still believe in all that stuff, but I have a rationale for it. But I'm not going to change anything. I'll just be nice to you as I'm taking your stuff. Okay, I'll cite principle. Because I don't like you and I don't understand you and you're not American, so you can't be, you can't be like me, and if you're not like me, you can't be good. So there's a whole set of rationales that go into it. But one of at the heart of this, I hate to point to all the problems without pointing towards solutions. All right, one solution that is absolutely necessary is that America and elites need to reflect. Is what we're doing working for us? And if it's not, let's look at the assumptions that we've made and see which ones are still valid. We live in a dynamic world. If you're not looking at your assumptions, trying to learn, you're really not living a very full life. You're kind of on automatic. This is absolutely necessary if the U.S. is going to come to this mindset that, okay, we're not going to be a hegemon, but we can still be a very great power. And the question is, how do we make ourselves greater? By cooperating with countries instead of trying to beat them into submission or take them over. The costs of trying to take over a country are very, very steep. The second point is that the U.S. has to look at how the rest of the world is growing and decide whether or not it wants to be part of it. And I think the solution is for other countries, especially the global South, Russia, Central Asia, China, to come together and say, even with Europe, and say, we're not going to form an organization. We have an organization. It's called the UN. But it's time that we all get together, CELAC, the South American groups, the African groups, and things like that, go to Donald Trump and says, listen, you can do whatever you want to your own people in terms of how much you want to tariff them. If you want to tax them, that's between you and your voters. All right, we're not going to comment on that. That's up to you. But you cannot try to pit us against each other in some cynical colonial divide and conquer game, because that's what is happening here. And it's time the world just says flatly, we don't agree on anything except that you're being a bully. And if this happens, Donald Trump has no choice but to taco. And the reason I say that is the U.S. can battle or, to a standstill, like with Russia and China, or it can actually dominate smaller countries, but it cannot fight everybody. We still have a huge surplus that is due to the fact that we sell services. If these countries got together and said, look, your services are no longer needed, we're going to put 500% tariffs on them. And, basically, we're going to end all your consulting and your big four accounting firms and things like that, and we're going to push them out. We have, alternatives to that that we can use, and we can certainly grow our own expertise, and we can use European ones, but you're finished there. That would take a huge chunk out of China. Then everything that's going to America, we're going to put tariffs on. So we're going to collect the tariffs on this side. We're not going to let them do on your side. So before they can come to you, all right, if you order them, we're going to take money out of it, and you're going to have to pay more. Given the fragile state of America, Donald Trump would have no choice but to say, oh, don't take this so seriously. We can work this out. Come on, all this stuff. He would still try his little games and everything like that. But he would be pushed into a situation where he'd have to look in different areas for distractions to keep the American public, from revolting against him. And that's kind of where I see things. I think that there is hope, but it's collective action is the only hope. You can't respond militarily, so you have to respond economically. And economically is really where America lives. It's why they object to China, because China's economics were improving so much. They're afraid that, the economics leads, in their mind, because it's funny. A thief always believes that everyone else is a thief or an idiot. All right. So, I'm just doing to them what they would do to me. Right. I'm just preempting them. So there's nothing wrong here. Right. And idiots, who cares? I'm not an idiot. If they're idiots, they deserve to, they deserve to be victims. They're there. They're the sheep for people like me, the wolf. So there's always a justification. So, and that's kind of where America is, and it has to move away from that. So let's hope that happens. Collective action economically is the only rational choice for countries to put an end to this kind of marauding adventurism that Donald Trump is promoting.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for that. I mean, I'm glad I had you on my show to talk us through these
Well,
issues.
don't say that yet. Wait till the reaction comes in and people start throwing darts, and the CIA shows up at your house and says, "We need to talk to you. Don't talk to that guy."
Well, that will be another show. that will be the next show. But thank you.
That's when you're doing the Maduro thing in orange jumpsuit with the handcuffs on, saying you're an enemy of the people. You're a fellow traveler. Well,
that would be good for TV. That would be good TV. I would do it. I would do it.
I really don't want to see you in that situation, Carl. I mean, it might be great television, but I can assure you, prison is no joke. I was a prosecutor. I had to visit these jails. Oh my God! As a defense attorney, they're not good places. The smell you can cut with a knife. The people are, surprisingly, because they're criminals, they're not nice either.
Well, thank you, Einar, for making your time to speak to us.
Anytime, it's really a pleasure.
If people want to follow your work, where would they go?
Under Asia Narratives Substack, I put out some things. Otherwise, I do 14 shows a week on average. So if you just type my name in, you'll get different things. I'm I don't know, I think 12 different stations in the Middle East. A lot of it will be unintelligible because they don't broadcast my voice, just the translation. Indian TV on probably about 8 or 9 different ones, and then Bloomberg, BBC, Chinese TV, obviously, but that's only about 40% of what I do. 60% is global. Everything from South Africa, Power FM, which apparently is a widely known and broadcast not only South Africa but throughout Africa. So I can't complain. I mean, somebody said, Einar, I did a search on you, an AI search, and I didn't believe it. So I consulted 3 other ones. They said, you're the most prolific guy out there. How do you do it? I said, well, I enjoy it. To me, in many ways, I can give answers or what I think are answers, but they're my opinion. Okay. Hopefully they stir people to thinking. But for me, it's the questions that matter. When you ask me questions, it tells me about how you're thinking. And this is a way of gathering information. So I'm always very cognizant. I will do the same issue on maybe 7 or 8 different medias spanning the world. So hearing what they have to say, what they're interested in, which is apparent through their questions, is to me the best way of gathering understanding. I am not in those countries, but if I hear what they are interested in, I start to have a better understanding of where they are. I'm on 3 think tanks. I write books, all this kind of nonsense. I wouldn't say that I'm a paramount of intellectualism, but I do enjoy discussions. I enjoy talking to you and hearing what you're thinking about and things like this. And hopefully it makes a bit of a difference. You have a following that is interested in these affairs. And, I always like to read the comments afterwards and try to learn from them. I believe that, if you think you know everything, you're basically intellectually dead. If you understand that there's so much more to learn, life is more interesting. It is. And, it gives you hope that maybe things can change. If you know everything, nothing's going to change. It's why I came to China. I love China because they said, oh, I came here in 2000. I want to learn. I want to learn. I'm so glad you're here. We want to learn from you. And I said, well, I don't think you can learn much from me. But the attitude convinced me that if there was going to be a renaissance in my lifetime, it would be in China. And 21 years later, as of January 7th, I have not been disappointed. There's change. China has lots and lots of problems. But the difference is, I notice, is they eventually recognize this is a problem. Then they try to solve it. In the United States, I lived in a city that was, at the time, the most segregated city in the United States, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. It's not a bad place to live, but it was extremely stratified. And it had been that way for long. Now it's only the third most, stratified city in America. But my point was, I would sit with people in the morning who ran the Fortune 500 companies. We belonged to the same athletic club, and ex-governors, people who really had a tremendous amount of power. And I'd criticize them, and I say, hey, listen, you guys, everything, you have all the power, and nothing has changed. And that was 21 years ago. And unfortunately, I'd have to say that although there's been some incremental changes, very small in terms of the metrics, in terms of education, safety, the things where people live, cost of living, all of these things, social development, it just hasn't happened. I can't say I had a bad experience. I ran my own district there, which is definitely still the most, when I took it over, it was not doing very well. Now it's one of the leading districts, not only in Milwaukee, but one in the United States. It has a public market we built. We built connected parks. We built river walks, parking structures, and it's pretty much self-contained and self-operating. And it was good. So I saw hope there. And I saw the opportunity to change. But 21 years later, all I see is that very little has actually changed, that the district continues to do well based on the impetus of all the people, because it wasn't just me. There were others involved, many involved. It was always a team project. But I haven't seen it spread. I was hoping that this would be, bellwether, and that this would, help the city, think of itself as something that could change, because this area was really not in good shape when I took it over. I mean, it was worth $16 million in total value. And then 10 years later, it was $720 million. Now I'm sure it's well over $1.5 billion. But that has not been mirrored in the rest of the city. Now, this area had specific advantages and things like that. But I do think that we have to, put away this idea of how we think about others, because it's a trap. Once if I'm a cynic, or I'm a criminal, or, I lock myself into a way of thinking where I think everyone else is the same. And then it's very, very difficult to create any real change. You have to kind of question that. And that's what I'm alluding to with America's elite. They have to see a crack in the wall and say, maybe there's something outside my core beliefs that I should be paying attention to. Perhaps I should have empathy for other people, not disdain. I can tell you absolutely, Carl, you have empathy. That's why I like you and I do your show. But there's so many people who don't have empathy. And you look at Donald Trump, there's those two images of him. One is a guy who he knows, who's up on stage. He's going off the stage. He cracks his head open. Donald Trump is rearing back. Everyone else is rushing to help the guy. He's like standing, he's afraid he's going to get blood on his things. And then most recently, he's speaking, and some guy behind him is, I don't know, having an aneurysm or a heart attack. And he's like looking at him as if he's, interrupting his, how dare you interrupt his speech? What are you doing? To stop flopping around like that. You're distracting people from me. This should be about me. Anyway, he doesn't have empathy, real empathy. And I'll tell you, I've never met a good person who doesn't have empathy, and I've never met a bad person who does have empathy. So it's something to think about. Once you can get beyond your own assumptions and start looking at how other people live and try to understand their point of view, I think there is hope. All right. But if you're locked into this idea that I'm right, you're wrong, I don't know what I'm talking about, I don't know on a basis, but I just feel that I'm right. I might be ignorant, but that's common sense. I know I'm right. Once you get locked into that, then you're going to have the problems. And this is not just Trump supporters. You have the same thing on the far left. They're always convinced that they're absolutely right, and they're willing to do whatever it takes. If I have to kill you to save you, so be it. The old idea that a lot of religious people had, during the Inquisition. Well, they're heathens, so if we burn them, God can sort them out, right? And it was all based on, I am absolutely right. I cannot be wrong. And that I think is the real enemy here.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, Einar Tangen. I have learned a lot, and every time I really enjoy our conversation. Thank you again for making the time to talk to us, and I look forward to have you back.
Oh, anytime you want, Carl. I always enjoy these. Although I feel afterwards, I feel like, oh God, you talk too much. I suppose that's why you asked me to come on.
No, this is why I want you to be on my show, so I can do less work. All I have to do is just sit back and listen. That's all I do. I just listen and record. Make my job easier.
I'd like to interview you one of these days and get your pitch on this, because you talk to so many different people, and you've developed your own perspective on so many things and issues. It would be really wonderful to reverse roles sometime. I'll interview you. How's that?
Feel free. Okay. Anytime we talk, you can feel free to reverse the table, reverse the role, and put me on the spot.
Next time, then I'll come up with some questions for you and things. And it's really about how you're thinking about all of these things, because you talked, as I said, you talked to so many people, and it's bound to have an effect. Clearly, I can understand your point of view from your questions and things like that, but I know there's a lot of more nuances in the way you're thinking and looking at stuff, and it would be really, really, really nice to hear your voice.
All right, it's a deal. Let's do it next time.
Okay. Whenever you're ready, whenever you're recovered from this ordeal, we can think about the next one.
Yes, thank you.
All right,
thank
Carl.
you, Einar, and thank you everyone for tuning in. Until next time. Bye-bye.